if we don't give our students opportunities to do that when they're in our classes in our schools, are they going to do that when they leave our schools, right?
Okay.
It's like practice, right? It's like if we want them to implement,
practice.
It's about practice, right? We're talking about practice.
Welcome to Hallway Conversations. We're a trio of educators who have plenty of questions about teaching and learning and school culture, and we believe in the value of collaboration and reflection as we seek to keep growing as teachers. So this podcast is our place for thinking out loud together about issues in education and why they might matter to Christian educators. Welcome to the conversation.
Hello everyone, welcome to Hallway Conversations. My name's Matt Beamers.
I'm Abby DeGroat.
And I'm Dave Mulder.
As always, we want to thank you for allowing the three of us to be here with you. And we want to thank you for joining us in the hallway. Each week, one of us brings a question. We try to think creatively around it in the context of what it means to teach Christianly. This is our last podcast of 2021. It is strange to think that a year ago, Hallway Conversations did not exist.
Wow.
That's so weird.
Well, to be honest, there was a lot of hallway conversations happening with us and many others
right.
in the education wing here, but none of them were recorded.
Yep.
And now as we sit on the cusp of 2022, we're humbled and grateful that there have been almost 11,000 downloads of our podcast over the past year, which is an astounding number.
Wild.
And just exceeds more than anything we could have asked or imagined when we started a year ago. So thank you so much for joining us in the hallway each week. Finally, if any of you have ideas or questions or feedback about our podcast or simply want to share what hallway conversations you're having, please email us at hallwayconvospod@gmail.com. That's hallwayconvospod@gmail.com. We're always looking for new topics, so please feel free to reach out to us.
That's right.
Folks, this week I'm bringing a quote. So the last few weeks, we took a bit of a hiatus. Dave, you posted a couple of our original
Classics,
podcast
right?
classics.
Yeah.
But before our break, we were kind of bringing different quotes. And one book that I've been reading ties in a bit with one of the classes I'm teaching is a book called Visions of Vocation, Common Grace for the Common Good by Steven Garber.
Great book.
It's a great
I have
book.
not read it.
It's
No.
fantastic, and maybe Dave, you can put a link in the show notes.
Yeah, you bet.
To really, really encourage. Part of the reason it resonated with me is especially at this time, this unique time as COVID continues. It does not feel, it just feels like we're on this never-ending trajectory where I feel like for a lot of people, or maybe I just speak for myself, this idea of vocation I really leaned on it, to be honest with you. This idea of like what a lot keeps us going in a time in teaching, and I'm sure in any vocation, when it just feels, what's the right word? It's a lot. Right? It just feels like a lot.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's that strong sense of vocation really that keeps you going. And so this book has really resonated with me. But there was a quote I want to read for you. It's a bit lengthy. It comes from near the beginning of the book. But it just talks about vocation in schools, and I just want to share it with you. So he ends a paragraph, says, "The reality is that our lives are very ordinary, in their own ways, of course. My friends see their lives like this too. How could they not? Apart from being horribly plagued by hubris, we do not see ourselves as history might. We live among ordinary people doing ordinary things in ordinary places. We are families and we are neighbors. We worship and we work. We laugh and we cry. We hope and we love. The stuff of life for everyone, everywhere. But it is also true that whether our vocations are as butchers, bakers, or candlestick makers, or people drawn into the worlds of business or law, agriculture or education, architecture or construction, journalism or international development, healthcare or the arts, in our own different ways, we are responsible for love's sake for the way the world is and ought to be. We are responsible for love's sake for the way the world is and ought to be. We are called to be common grace for the common good." And then Garber goes on to say, he quotes, paraphrases Jeremiah 29:7. He says, "Seek the well-being of the city," was Jeremiah's prophetic word to the exiles in Babylon. For, quote, "when it flourishes, you will flourish." To learn to see ourselves implicated in history, to see that we share a common vocation to care not only for our own flourishing, but for the flourishing of the world is the vision that has brought this book into this being. To to see that we share a common vocation to care not only for our own flourishing, but for the flourishing of the world. And my question as I read this, Dave and Abby, is do schools have a responsibility to share in this common vocation to teach students not only to care for their own flourishing, but to care for the flourishing of the world? In other words, is it the responsibility for schools and teachers to help students seek the well-being of the city?
Yeah.
And if so, why? Or why not? And then my question that I'll probably get back to is, if why, how the heck do we do that? So just simple, and we can answer that in 15 minutes.
Right.
I'd be nothing but happy and impressed, to be honest. So I don't know, Dave. I'm going to put you on the spot here first. It's the beauty of asking the question.
Right.
I get to listen to you guys respond first, but yeah, but is that our role, and why or why not?
So as you're reading the quote, I'm thinking through the schools that I've been part of in my almost 25 years as a teacher now. And how many of them have language around equipping students for acts of service? That's so often part of the mission statements of a lot of schools. And there's a part of me that feels like, we've talked before on the podcast about mission statements as a promise statement. So this is a promise that the school is making to the families and to the community that it serves, that this is what we're about, right? So if we are promising to equip students for service, we have to prepare them for that then, right? If that is truly our mission, if we're saying this is our mission, then we have to do that. And I guess that's where, when I think about, seeking the good of the city, to me, right away my brain goes to, well, then how are they going to get outside the four walls of the school into that community in some way? So
now I'm going to come back for a quick second. I know you don't know the answer to this.
We'll see. Maybe I do.
But why do you suspect so many schools put this idea of service in their mission statement? So just to play devil's advocate, because in the end we're schools.
Should they?
We're schools. Right. We're there for learning. Right. We don't exist for or maybe we do. So why do you think that's become such a common phrase or common word in so many mission and vision statements, Dave?
So for my teaching career, I've been in Christian schools, right? So let's be clear about that too. And I think for a lot of schools, this is my wonder. I shouldn't say this so decisively, like this is why it's happening. I wonder if this is where they're taking Jesus' teaching the greatest commandment and trying to put it into practice, right? So what is the greatest commandment? Well, to love God above all and to love your neighbor as yourself. How do you do that? Well, I'm going to serve God, and I'm going to serve those around me. I'm going to serve others, right? And I think that's probably a way that schools are trying to operationalize that idea. If I'm taking that commandment very seriously, how does that play out on a day-to-day basis? Well, I'm going to love my neighbor by serving my neighbor. I'm going to be actively involved. I don't know that for a fact, but it's striking to me how many. If you go just start Googling Christian schools websites and start looking them up and just take a tally. I suspect it's well over 50%. Of the schools that I'm familiar with anyway, that are going to mention service in that way. So that's probably some part of what's driving it. I don't know.
I mean, what do you, when you think about seeking the well-being of the city, what's the answer to the why piece for you?
As you were reading, I was reminded, I haven't taught this play in a long time, but I used to teach our town, Thurton Wilder.
Oh, yeah.
So, right, grade 9 English every year. So Emily Webb, at the end of that play, right, she dies and she comes back and she gives a goodbye monologue, right? I used to make my students write their own version of it. Like, I love it.
Yeah.
And she basically says goodbye to all the ordinary things that she took for granted for her whole life, right? Like she relives like a 12th birthday with her family, and goodbye all of these things like, oh, Earth, you were too wonderful for me to realize, right? And so I think part of like seeking the good of the city and thinking about our kids too is helping them see all those things in a way that really imparts like the sacredness of all of life, right? So I think Christian schools, I was telling you both before this, my third grader, her class went on a really formative trip. Yesterday they went to Walmart. They've been praying for people with cancer all year, went to Walmart, bought things for them, brought them, delivered them to the people they'd been praying for. Very formative for my daughter, right? And so I think our schools do wonderful acts of service like that. But I also think seeking the good of the city means, apart from those special, like, this is a service project, thinking about how the world is sacred and how we can pick up trash every day, right? And how learning about science is helping us, you know, it's like seeing the ordinary through a lens of sacredness and helping us realize that it feels more reformed to me too, right? Than just saying we're going to do our service project and then we're going to go back to school.
Right.
Right? Like,
can I jump on that?
Yeah.
This is my biggest beef, right? And I think this is picking up what you were getting at too, Matt, at the beginning.
I think both are good. Service. I'm not saying that I don't think service projects are good.
Right. And service learning has value.
Totally.
For sure.
Totally.
But my wonder sometimes is, for Christian schools, it feels like everything has to turn into a service project. Like, better do a service project, right? Yeah. And I'm pointing the finger at myself because I've been part of that in the schools that I've served too, right? And that's where I'm wondering, like, is that actually the mission of the schools? Should be an academic institution first of all, I think. Yeah. But what does that even mean, right? Like, if it's an academic institution, does that mean I only care about things that they're going to learn in books, or does that mean I'm trying to equip them for all of life, not just teaching them for who they are right now, but for who they're going to be as well? Yeah.
No, it makes me, I guess, if I think about it. Why do we want these things for our students beyond, if we're going to, again, it depends how you define academic, Dave. I guess I'm thinking about my, very narrow view, very narrow definition, typical of like, hey, math, science, the government learning outcomes or the stated learning outcomes. But to me, it's like, it feels like then we're limiting what learning looks like in terms of like this happens in a classroom. And if I think about, I think it like what you said, if it's like, let's tack on a service project or let's do the question for me is what does one have to do with the other? Like, can we make a connection? Like for human flourishing, like that idea, that question of how, students will always ask, when am I ever going to use this? Right. And maybe we need to be better at saying, well, let me tell you about what we're going to do next week, and let me tell you what a difference that's going to make in Denver or Vancouver or Pella or Des Moines or Grand Rapids or wherever you're serving, right? That this idea that, I guess to me, I'm thinking about the phrase that keeps coming back to me is this idea, are we called to be co-creators, co-restorers, co-workers with God, and to not seek the flourishing of the city as an institution, then to me says, then are we abdicating our role as being co-workers with God? Yeah. In other words, are we saying to our students, what we're doing here is preparing you to be a co-worker with God, whereas do we want our students to be co-workers in the here right now, in the here and now? But yet, on the other hand, I also feel at times like, do we lose some authenticity? Like I'm picturing that, whatever that is, that one scene where Oprah's, you get a gift, you get a service project, you get a car, and now we're just going to do service projects, and then do they lose their authenticity? Like, how do we know that we're actually contributing to the flourishing of the city, especially when there's these standalones? So I wrestle with it a bit. I guess I'm thinking about this line that Garber uses, where he talks about we're called to be common grace for the common good, right? So as an institution, we're called to be common grace for the common good. Our student, but I guess I'm also feeling like what makes that experience formative? It's not just that someone is on the receiving end of that grade three's goodness, like we're helping them flourish, but how are we actually helping our grade 3 students flourish? And when we help our students flourish, how is that even contributing to the common good of the city, right? So often to think about these service projects as what can we do, what can we offer, how can we bring healing and restoration to our communities, and amen to that. We want our students to see that. But how in doing that might that actually bring healing and restoration and flourishing to us, right? That it's a formative learning experience for us, right? It's this idea of like, like we're blessed to be a blessing, or you do these projects, and how often you come back and say, yeah, like I went with the mindset of I'm going to give of myself,
and I do like that this project was a long term,
right?
Like it
it's
developed, it was organic, it was long term. This has been since the beginning of the year. This was kind of a culmination, and I appreciate that.
And that to me makes it much more of a formational learning experience too, right? That it wasn't just this one-off. It's service day. We're gonna go clean ditches or whatever, right? Like
which I've been a part of too.
Yeah, and I have too.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think the difference of this that it is that kind of intentionality on the part of the teacher or the school that they're going to build then in a relational component. They're going to invest the time and the resources into developing this too. Like that's going to do something for those kids who participated.
Yeah, and my wonder is, right, if we don't give our students opportunities to do that when they're in our classes in our schools, are they going to do that when they leave our schools, right? Okay. It's like practice, right? It's like if we want them to implement
practice.
It's about practice, right? We're talking about practice, but
about the game.
Yeah, I can talk about the game. If we don't practice, right, then when we do engage culture outside of the classroom, like where we're out on our living as independent adults out in the world, if we have no sense of what that looks like and feeling a responsibility to do that, then I wonder that should we be surprised when that doesn't happen as adults?
Okay, but now here's my controversial hot take of the day.
Yeah.
Is this actually the role of the school? And here's why I say that. I think we're in a complicated set of overlapping spheres here, right? Like, should this actually be the responsibility of families to, enculturate this in their kids? Should this be the role of the church to be active in service? And I mean, Christian schools are in a weird situation because it maybe blurs some lines in ways there too. But I have a good friend who's a youth pastor. He's been a youth pastor for a long time, and he would critique Christian schools for this. He says they're stepping all over the church's sphere. And the church should be the group that's out there getting kids invested and involved, and that's kind of discipling, formational purpose. Is that also the school's responsibility? Well, maybe, but I don't know. That's a potentially controversial take. But what do you think?
Yeah, I guess as you're asking that question, Dave, I think in the end, for me, it comes back to sort of what's the learning target, right? And I don't think it's an either. I don't think it should be an either or. Again, what's the mission vision of the school? What's the promise statement of the school, right? So the school that I was at for a long time before I came here, their promise statement was educating for wholeness by engaging God's world in the servant way of Jesus. So this idea of educating for wholeness, educating for shalom, educating for right relationship, right? We're going to educate for people to be in right relationship with God, others, self, God's creation. How are we going to do that? By engaging the world in the servant way of Jesus. So for their promise statement was to say, for us to be in right relationship, that can't happen in a rigorous academic context, but that cannot happen without engaging the world in the servant way of Jesus. To say, hey, that's the only way for that to happen. Now, does that mean it's not the church's responsibility? But I guess the counter to that, Dave, is to say, to say it's the church's responsibility then is to say, well, this is sort of a churchy, sacred, spiritual thing. Right. That's not our sphere. Yeah. That doesn't belong to us. Where if we really believe, well, all of these things belong to God. None of these vocations is more sacred or spiritual. Maybe instead of pointing the church at the school, and I don't know the context, should be saying thanks for partnering with us in the formation of these young people. To say, like, why does he want to do that all by himself, or she want to do that all by himself? Just like this, the school shouldn't look at the church and say, well, you're taking. No, like we got to be working together for the good of these young people, for the common good, I guess. And so I get a little bit, my back can get up a little bit when I hear churches getting protective of, like, this belongs to us, especially if we're saying, hey, are we co-creators? Are we co-learners? is what we're learning in school have to do anything with what's happening in the city? Well, if the answer to that is no,
Right.
what are the implications of that?
Yeah.
Then what are we doing this year for? Then we really are educating for ACTs and we're defining excellence as getting into the best university to get the best job, right? And we're sending a message to our students that that's what church is for.
Right.
That's not what school is for.
And
and
the
I'm
messy
worried
part of
about
this, the messy part of this is time.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Like, so I can sympathize because I know how busy teenagers are. I taught them.
Right.
Right? So they've got youth group on Wednesdays. They've got 3 games a week, 2 games a week. They've got practice every other night. I mean, I lived that too.
Yep.
Right? You'd go from practice, maybe grab a bite at home for 20 minutes, run to youth group on Wednesday. Well, guess what? It's real easy to skip that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right? Because you're not going to get penalized and sit on the bench for skipping youth group.
that.
Right? So, I mean, there's just so much competition for our kids' time.
Yeah.
And even in families, right? So dinners together, and what are those formative? And so I think that's the part where this can get very complicated.
Yeah.
And where there might be ownership issues, right? Because how much time are we committing to each of these?
Right. And I think that would be my friend's complaint too. Like, who should have the primary responsibility? I think he would agree with what you're bringing up there too, really, Matt. Right? Like, of course the family has a responsibility. Of course the school is responsible. Of course the church has a responsibility.
Yeah.
Who should be taking the lead on discipleship?
Yeah.
Well, probably the church should be taking the lead on discipleship, but you can make an argument that the family should be. I mean, there's different ways you could talk that through.
And I do like the idea of schools connecting the service that they're doing to the curriculum that they're teaching.
Yeah, right. Because that's what's going to make it a formational learning experience.
Right. And that's also what connects academics to the outside world. Like the world belongs to God.
Right.
Friends, we know that your time is valuable, and we want to thank you for joining us today for another hallway conversation. Whether it's this day, this week, this month, this school year, we hope that the Lord gives you what you stand in need of. And as you end this year, we want to offer you this blessing. May the road rise up to meet you. May the wind be always at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face. The rains fall soft upon your fields. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand. Thanks for listening, everyone. Have a good week and happy New Year.
This podcast was quite literally dreamed up during one of our actual hallway conversations. Our music is by Ethan Mulder. Hallway Conversations is an independent podcast created and produced by Matt Beamers, Abby DeGroat, and Dave Mulder. Thanks for listening.